Good morning everyone and welcome to the Equal Opportunity Committee's 12th meeting of 2013. Can I remind everyone to set any electronic devices to flight mode or off? And can I, before I start with introductions, can I apologise for my voice? I won't be doing too much talking this morning. I'll be relying heavily on my committee this morning. At the table we have our clerking and research team together with official reporters, and around the room we are supported by broadcasting services and the security office. And can I also welcome the observers in the public gallery? My name is Mary Fee and I'm the committee's convener. Can I ask committee members and witnesses to introduce themselves in turn? And could I ask our witnesses to give a very brief introduction to their role when they introduce themselves? Marco.
I'm Marco Biaggi, I'm MSP for Edinburgh Central and I'm Deputy Convener of the committee.
And good morning, I'm Dennis Robertson, MSP for Aberdeenshire West.
And good morning, John Finney, MSP Highlands and Islands.
John Mason, MSP for Glasgow Shettleston.
Alec Johnston, MSP North East Scotland.
Siobhan McMahon, MSP Central Scotland. This way, sorry. I'm Angela Wilson. I'm an Operational Chief Superintendent and current Chair of the Women's Development Forum. We were set up 10 years ago to work with the service to help develop people to their full potential in order to give the best possible service to our communities. And we have 5 particular areas we work on, which are recruitment and retention, training and career development, work-life balance and communication.
Hello, I'm Mary Mathieson. I'm a primary teacher of several years, well, too many to mention, from Aberdeen City. I'm currently the Vice-Convener of the EIS Equalities Committee, and as part of that remit I convene the Gender Issues Subgroup.
I'm Hazel Matheson. I'm Head of National Operations and Skills Development Scotland, and I've got responsibility for delivery of national training programmes, including modern apprenticeships and national skills initiatives. Skills Development Scotland also has a remit for all-age careers information, advice and guidance. It has a role with industry and employers in terms of their workforce development, and we do a lot of relationship and partnership working.
I'm Joyce Cullen. I'm the convener to the Law Society of Scotland's Employment Law Committee. I'm also a solicitor in private practice. I'm a partner in the firm of Brodie's and I'm chairman of the firm.
Thank you very much for that. The only agenda item today is an evidence session on women in work with a focus on occupational segregation. And committee members have a number of questions for our witnesses this morning, and I'm going to start with Dennis Robertson and then move on to John Mason. Dennis.
Thank you, convener. It's quite striking that we're in 2013, but the evidence that we have, and certainly from your own submissions as well, the stereotype sort of gender roles are still very prominent. What's your views on that? And why do you think we still have this stereotype gender sort of route into work? Who'd like to start? Maybe SDS, because I was actually sort of taken with some of your comments within your submission.
I think young people make their minds up and make choices in their career choices at a very young age. They are influenced by parents, by peers, by other relations, by teachers in primary schools, by teachers in high schools, and very often by the time they reach school leaving age and they're looking at choices in careers, it's very well defined. The choice is very well defined, and it's, you know, they're looking at, and I'm generalising here, but quite often it's youngsters and young ladies come forward with career aspirations in care, retail, administration, whereas young boys come forward with career aspirations in construction and engineering. What we as an organisation try to do is ensure that as much information as possible is imparted to these young people at as early a stage as possible, so that they can look at all the options that are available and make decisions on all the, you know, in terms of their strengths and weaknesses and their career aspirations. They have the full information so that they can make choices. But quite often they make choices based on societal views of norms for their gender in life. So we're trying as an organisation to ensure that we promote as much information and give as much information into schools and to young people as at an earlier possible stage, so that they have all the information to make good career choices. But by the time they reach a stage of entering in a modern apprentice programme, they've got very definite views as to the career they have in mind for themselves.
Choices are also made in reflection of the work that's available within certain regions, say, of Scotland. So if I was looking at the North East, for instance, energy's a very high-profile industry to get into within the North East sector, for instance. So do you think basically what's available within certain regions of Scotland is a factor?
I'm sure it is a factor. I mean, in terms of the information that we give across to young people in school, we're ensuring that they have full information about careers in Scotland and beyond. But some people are not looking beyond the village they live in for their future career. So, I mean, that's another issue about, the boundaries by where they will travel to work. So I'm sure that will play a role, but we're trying to ensure that youngsters have all the information about all the career opportunities available to them.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to? TJ?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a very clear issue here in terms of life experiences and school experiences. I think particularly in times of austerity, when employment is not secure and many families experience unemployment, there are very narrow role models available for some children. And when they come into primary schools, very many of our pupils will not experience a male role model at all. That's where primary and schools are different in many respects from my colleagues sitting here, where the gender balance is very much female dominated. And when they do see males in a primary school, very often it will be in the role of the head teacher. So they're not experiencing the breadth of male role model that they should have. We've been working with Close the Gap. We did a Glow TV video conference last year aimed at primary schools, looking at gender stereotypical employment opportunities, male job, female job, and trying to expose the myth that only women could be nurses or primary teachers and only men could be chefs but women could be cooks. So looking at that sort of thing. And we're also exploring materials from equalities and human rights to see what we can put into schools that will inform people and try to break down the belief that certain people carry out certain roles here. I think that there is a great opportunity within CFE to take forward equalities issues. Many of the outcomes relate to recognising gender, the uniqueness of individuals. But there's a very big feeling out there that primary education in particular is about the soft end of education and the nurturing end, and the real meat and drink only happens in the secondary sector where you get to the qualifications. And I think if we're going to break down barriers of stereotypical attitudes toward gender, we need to get in there at a really early stage. We need to get more men involved in primary school education, but at the same time we need to safeguard that then the promotion opportunities do not skew in that area. And we need to give time to the primary schools to take forward the scope for interdisciplinary learning, contextualised learning, work experience down in the primary school. Our school has had a link with an oil company, and the children from the primary 6 classes filled in CVs, went into the company, they went round the workshops, they went to the accounts department, they did the reception. The more we expose children to options and the earlier we expose them, the more chance we have of giving them realistic options for diverting themselves into job opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise consider.
Before I bring in any more of the witnesses to answer, I've got 2 supplementaries from Alex Johnson and Siobhan McMahon, and then Dennis, I'll come back to you.
Sure. I'm sorry to lead in, but it was something that Hazel Matheson said, and I think you were talking in relation to young people and access and training, but I have a concern that I raise often in debate and in committee about workforce mobility within Scotland, which I think we have a problem with. What I wanted to ask is a very specific question, and that is, from what you said, or to take that forward, do you think there is a difference in the mobility of workers between male and female workers either at a young or a training level or at any place in the career? Is there a difference between the sexes?
I have no information on that. Nothing that I can bring today. I don't have any evidence on that side at all.
Again, it was something Hazel Matheson said regarding the apprenticeship programme. We've heard in evidence and with briefings that have been provided to us that females are still not 50-50 when they start off, and they're less likely to be level 3, 4 and 5 of the apprenticeship programme. We've also seen in the submission that you gave, which was helpful with the women in business, that you reinforce that women are more likely to go into hairdressing and beauty and start businesses there. But if we're really trying to get to 50-50, we would rather see those females doing other sectors than the males, taking a part in beauty. So what specific programmes do SDS engage with to break that down?
Well, I think, as I say, just to reinforce that youngsters make choices at quite a young age. So the time they present themselves for modern apprenticeship opportunities, they've made their mind up what they want to do. So I think, in the main, we don't have significant evidence of youngsters coming forward and looking for opportunities in a atypical gender that they can't get. We do have some instances of young girls looking for construction apprenticeships, finding that a bit more difficult, but we work with our training provider network who we deliver our apprenticeships through to help to try and get them to secure these opportunities. So there is an onus on all the providers that we contract with to deliver our apprenticeship scheme that they must use open and transparent recruitment practices. We do training with our own staff and with our providers, and they must pass that on to employers, because what we're looking for is open and transparent and non-discriminatory recruitment practices. And generally, we will manage to secure opportunities for atypical, girls into boys' jobs, boys into girls' jobs, if that's how you want to see it. We managed to secure that. In predecessor organisations, we have actually ring-fenced opportunities. So we've ring-fenced, say, construction opportunities for girls, etc. And we didn't have girls coming forward to present themselves. So I think, just trying to identify opportunities and say, right, these opportunities are for girls, doesn't solve a problem, because the problem doesn't surface when a youngster leaves school and wants to apply for a job opportunity. They have got they've firmed up their career aspiration at a younger age. So I think it's actually getting in at a younger age and providing role models for young people about career opportunities, so that they, by the time they have left school and they've got the qualifications required to go into the sector that they want to move into, they have the necessary skills and opportunities, and they've made their career choice and have gone in the right path at an earlier stage, because they don't make their decisions at age 16 or 17. They've made their decisions at a younger age. So I think by just putting programmes on specifically for women who have left school will not solve the problem, because they've made their decisions at a younger stage. What we do is we work with partner organisations to do taster sessions with young people at school, to show them careers in construction, careers in IT, so that at the stages of them making choices of subjects, they can see the whole spectrum of careers available for them, so that while in school and while making choices, they're looking at their career aspirations and making the right choices then. That doesn't happen at 16. So we do work with partner organisations to try and ensure that information is imparted at a younger age, so that youngsters are making decisions and making the right subject choices. There is work to be done with employers as well. I mean, we have a team in our office, in our organisation, who works specifically with employers who are looking for modern apprenticeship opportunities. And what we need to do is ensure that these employers are using non-discriminatory recruitment practices and are looking at a diverse as possible a workforce, and looking at males, females, and the whole spectrum of individuals coming forward. So we need to work on both angles as well. We need to ensure that workplaces are accommodating of everybody and who wants to work in them. But I think youngsters make choices at quite a young age of their careers.
I mean, obviously I would agree with you that more has to be done, and I think given the Scottish Government's preventative spend agenda, I would have hoped that more programmes were starting to begin at an earlier age, and that's probably one of the reasons I ask, because you've mentioned a few things that you work with the partners, but I would have thought that SDS would want to get involved with primary schools and various others a bit more than they are at the moment, because clearly, as much as you said, they're making their choices, they've already made that choice, there's very little you can do. When someone's already in the workplace and then they receive an apprenticeship for the work that they do. It's reinforcing that the lack of options at that stage. Would you not agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, go back to your issue at primary schools. We've got a My World of Work web offer. And really what we're doing is, as well as using that ourselves with individuals, both young people and adults, we're training all our capacity building with all our partners in schools, in colleges, etc., so that they can use the huge information resource within My World of Work, so that teachers in primary schools can be using this resource with youngsters to show them all the different careers, to take them through diagnostic testing, to identify their strengths, what they like, so that they can identify, well, actually, if I like that and I'm good at that, this might be a good career opportunity. So we, our face-to-face in primary school is very, very limited, but our resources go into primary schools, and we're training our partners in primary schools to use that resource so that all these options can be explored with young people at a young age.
I'm not a fan of My World at Work, I have to be honest with you, because I think, in particular in Lanarkshire, when 17% of young people are using it, there's a problem, there's a barrier that we're putting in place, and also I think the onus is on the teachers now to do the career advice rather than actually the groups that should be. But just finally, on the barriers that are in place, again in your submission you said about single mothers in particular, do you know, another barrier. How do you engage with all those barriers that are already in place for females who are coming for training programmes, because yes, they may have made up their mind, but they'll be away from the workforce for a time, they want to get back in. How do they get involved? Because we heard in evidence a few weeks ago, just before recess, that those who have left their working environment find it very difficult to get back in. And of course, with our agenda, and it's right that we look at youth employment at the moment, there is a barrier to those who are a bit older. So how do you engage with that?
We've got a variety of programmes. We've just launched a new initiative, the Employability Fund, to help both young people and adults who are out of the workplace to move back into the workplace. So across Scotland there is now provision, and it will be geared to individual need. So if a young single or an older single mum wants to come back into the workplace, provision is available. Again, it depends, if she's got barriers around, I don't know, confidence or core skills, these will be tackled. If it's more about trying to identify the appropriate career choice, again, that can be tackled. And then we'll do some pre-apprenticeship type delivery as well. So there's a whole stream of provision in place to help people move into work. What we then need to do is, looking at career choices again of individuals, with our training provider network, identify appropriate employers who, hopefully are looking at flexible working opportunities, whether it be part-time or whatever work individuals might be looking for. Barriers, for instance, if it's a young working mum with childcare, that's not an issue for us. We don't have a responsibility, but what we will have a responsibility to do is to make sure our training providers are working with employers to look at flexible working arrangements in places. Modern apprenticeships can be delivered on a part-time basis as well. So if opportunities for people returning to the labour market are part-time, modern apprenticeship opportunities can be part-time as well. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can to help individuals progress back into work. What you said though is right. Our funding is skewed to young people, so there is a greater contribution. Remember, at the end of the day, that all we're doing is giving a contribution towards the cost of the modern apprenticeship training. The bulk of the cost has been picked up by the employer. Our contribution rates are skewed towards young people, in recognising that in the main, young people have got limited vocational skills in that area. So, and adults generally have some vocational skills that they're taking with them, so they don't require as much learning. Hence our funding is skewed towards young people, so there's greater contribution rates for young people.
Angela Wilson wanted to come in, and I don't know, Joyce Cullen, if you wanted to make a comment, and then I'll come back to you, Dennis.
What's been said here, that generally speaking people make their choices or start to be skewed very early on. And one of the things we've seen that's made a big difference in the police service, because as you've seen, we've had quite a rapid rise in the number of women joining the service, particularly in the last 10 years, has been the media portrayal So as we're seeing more female police officers being portrayed in the media, whether that be through fly-on-the-wall programmes, whether it be through dramas or through documentaries, people are actually starting to see the role models on television and starting to see that as something that they could possibly do. Now, of course, the challenge for us is having attracted women into the service in such numbers, because actually some of the recruitment at the moment is almost at a 50-50. So a lot of young women in particular join, is we then need to be able to retain them, and they need to realise that once they're into the service, that many of the barriers that then they face that we can then undo. But I would say one of the big issues for us was around media portrayal. And showing women doing those very jobs, so that young people were seeing those sort of jobs and actually seeing women able to do them. Currently, we're working with a producer of a drama to try and celebrate the 10th year of the Women's Development Forum. I think it's the 100th year anniversary of women in policing, to actually show the type of jobs that women do in a very factual sort of way, not turning it into a fly-on-the-wall series, which again I hope will improve recruitment yet further. But as we're going on later in the committee, I'm sure some of the questions will be more directed at how we then retain women, how we make sure there's not the segregation within the organisation. I just want to very, very briefly mention one point around choices and people moving location. It is really fundamentally, we find it's around childcare support, that especially in our Scottish society, one of the things that's fundamental to us is very often childcare support is provided by family members. Particularly, as I don't know many nurseries that will take children after 6 o'clock in the evening, and many of these professions require you to work beyond 6 o'clock in the evening, whether it be to work overtime or that's your general shift pattern or whatever. And if you don't have a family member close by, you can't therefore move to a location whereby you're going to be reliant upon nursery services or even child carers. I don't know many child carers exact a massive premium who work beyond 6 o'clock in the evening. So I think that's something that we can look at, how we support men and women with childcare issues beyond that sort of 5-6 o'clock cut-off, and in an affordable way that allows them to go through apprenticeships where perhaps they're not on that necessarily the highest wage initially, to get into that workplace. That's all I was going to say at that point.
Cullen, did you want to come in on it?
Yes, certainly. The legal profession, I think it's fair to say, has not had any difficulty in recent years in recruiting women into the profession. The current stats are about 60-40 women to men studying law and coming into the legal profession. And at the moment, we're about 48% overall of women solicitors in the profession. In the last few years, particularly, the statistics show quite an incredible increase in numbers. And I have to say, I was myself surprised to note that in the age group 25 to 30, there are now 2.5 times the number of women to men within the legal profession. So I don't think there's any difficulty at all about persuading girls from an early age. Perhaps they're watching the right TV programmes, I don't know, but they're certainly coming into the legal profession in great numbers, and they're being encouraged to do that through the schools. One of the interesting things, which some research was done quite a long time ago now by the Law Society 2005, was that once women are into the profession, they tend to go into particular types of jobs, and that has had an impact on, for example, pay. But it'd be interesting to see there's new research being commissioned now, and my own view is that 7 years on from the last research, we may find that those jobs have changed. It's become such a normal thing for women to work in the legal profession. Certainly my experience is that they're working across all the different types of jobs and managing them very well.
Marco, did you have a brief supplement?
Yes, to that, could you perhaps venture any more theories as to why there has been such a marked shift? Because looking at the evidence, I was very impressed by the change in intake, and there are a lot of professions that would consider that to be success, or at least the start of it. Why has that happened?
I think we can be complacent, but I think part of the reason is that as there are more women coming into the profession, it becomes more of a normal, a desirable thing to do, to be seen to be a woman lawyer. I think there are now a lot of women who are role models, who are seen that they can get on within the profession, and we're just seeing more and more coming in. I think women do very well in the sorts of jobs that lawyers are doing in practice today. And of course, there are a huge variety of jobs within the legal profession. I mean, my own job is as a partner in a law firm, private practice, but there's now about a quarter of jobs are in the in-house jobs, so people can work with banks or businesses or government bodies or whatever, as well as in private practice. And I think it's seen as a very attractive option for women and for men, that there's such an enormous variety of interesting jobs to do.
Why is that the case now, whereas it wasn't perhaps 10, 15, 20 years ago?
I think it's been changing over a very long time. I mean, I qualified 30 years ago, and certainly at my year at university, I was, I think, maybe 40% to 60%. So even by then, women were beginning to study law. But once we came into the profession, I would say certainly very much in a minority, and it was much harder to push through and to become a partner. But I think things have changed. And as I say, I think there are role models. I think women see that it is perfectly possible to do well in the legal profession, and that they're coming in ever-increasing numbers. I don't remember for myself that there was any barrier to coming in as a woman. I think it just wasn't seen as the norm. I do remember at a very early stage in my career, many clients would assume that I was my boss's secretary rather than another lawyer. That would never happen now. Clients are completely used to women being their lawyers, and there just isn't an issue there. Yeah.
And has there been any deliberate work with schools, or has this happened more organically?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I have 3 children who are all studying law, and I would say certainly that if you are good at the art subjects and you're relatively clever, you are pushed into doing the sort of subjects like law from school, and therefore I think women, or girls rather, who often are perhaps doing art subjects rather than science subjects. I don't know the reason for that, but I think there are a lot of girls who go into that side, and if they're clever, they are encouraged to study law. So that may be part of the reason, but that's only from my personal perception.
Okay. Dennis, I'll bring you back in, and then I'll move to John Mason.
Thank you, Convenor. Perhaps, witnesses, if you've got a view on, is the current legislation adequate in terms of trying to address the gender balance, or do we need more legislation? What's your view?
I would say the legislation is sufficient. It's the difference between policy and practice that's the issue. You know, if the legislation was followed by the letter of the law, then there wouldn't be a problem. But very often people interpret it, or actually there isn't enough monitoring and checking that the law is being adhered to. So for me, I mean, there might be some changes needed around the edges, but it's actually the practice that needs to change as opposed to the policy.
Anyone else want to comment?
I think there are some areas where legislation could perhaps be improved to help women return to work or find flexible routes back into work. I'm thinking particularly of women who may have taken career breaks for maternity leave or whatever, and who are trying to come back into work. They may not particularly want to come back in full time, but they may want to build up their hours. And certainly from the teaching profession, it's quite restrictive. We used to have job share arrangements where, if you like, the control over the partnership was in the hands of the practitioner. And if one job share partner decided that they wished to move on or retire, or perhaps were lucky enough to become full-time employment, it was then the option was up to the partner who retained the post whether or not they wished to seek another partner, or whether they themselves wished to increase the number of hours that they worked, or indeed go to full-time. However, arrangements have changed now, and we're now talking about flexible working, but within the education sector that's very limited as to what that can mean. And it's not a given that you can have flexible working. It's set within the school. The education authority will decide whether or not that's appropriate for a particular school, and an arrangement, and the control of it then rests with the employer. So there's very little scope then for a woman who's perhaps got young children coming back into work and wanting to work part-time initially, but seeking to build up their hours at a later stage when their children become older and are more independent, for them to step up their contracts, because they tend to be permanent contracts. And this refers back to what you were speaking about movement, because very often within a school you'll find that for a person to gain full-time from part-time, they may actually have to resign their post within a school and relocate to another school, or perhaps even a different neighbouring authority, in order to achieve that. So I think some kind of legislation that would enable employers to take a more flexible approach to getting women back into work when they've taken career breaks or maternity leave, because unlike other areas where we're seeing men taking up part-time working opportunities, That's not mirrored in education. It's women who take the caring roles and who are taking on the part-time employment. Men tend to be in education when they're there, and they are there full-time. So I think that kind of legislation would be helpful.
Of that is part of the barrier, not the roles of the carer, that you're still reflecting that women tend to take the lead part as the main carer at home and not men, so therefore you're reinforcing a gender stereotype there.
I think there's no doubt that society in itself sees women as having the caring role, whether it's for elderly parents or for children, and it's often a decision that's taken within a family. It's the family that makes the decision as to who will be the person who will take on that role, and it can be aimed at quite simply who's earning the biggest salary. Therefore, they will be the person who will stay in full-time employment, and very often it's the woman who is on the lesser salary who takes that route. And I think it's about recognising that that's what society perceives and what many people respond to. And I don't think you can say that you're trying to restrict it. We're trying to actually find a way that these people who come back into work can up their contribution, can up their working arrangements, because also we have to recognise that when women or whoever take career breaks, there's an immediate impact. There's an impact on their access to professional development. There's an impact on their pension for the future. There's an impact on the choices that they will make. And if you're not working full-time and you're not gaining all of those things, you then are impeded. It's a barrier to promotion, because you don't have the same experience and the same opportunities as other people have. So it's a way of making sure that you're garnering the talent that you want back to the places that it needs to be, whether it's a man or whether it's a woman, and that those opportunities for flexible approaches to working should be available irrespective of your gender.
In response to your question about whether the law could be changed to improve things further, I think the law does actually give a lot of protection now to women, obviously in terms of recruitment, promotion, etc. It's unlawful to discriminate against women on the grounds of either their gender or their fact that they're mothers or married or whatever. I think that the bigger changes perhaps need to be in people's attitudes. And I do see attitudes changing, certainly in the legal profession. My own experience is that I would say even since the 2005 research that the Law Society did, I think attitudes are changing with men and women working certainly as lawyers. And I think particularly where we're talking about women as carers, we see changes now in that the young men who have young children are very keen to be taking responsibility for their children. And perhaps there are certainly fewer men now who are working flexibly than women, but it is changing slowly. And I think certainly in the legal profession, there's quite a substantial proportion of men and women who work flexibly, who work perhaps 4 days or can go early, etc. And I think within the legal profession, we're very lucky in that we're able to control quite a lot of what we work when we work. We can work from home in the evenings if we want to, and that does make things much easier as far as childcare is concerned. So it's perhaps a function of how the work is done as to whether it's easier or harder for women with childcare responsibilities to keep going through their careers and to gain promotion.
Do you have any further questions? I'll bring in John Mason now, who has some more questions around education, and then John Finney, who has questions around the police force. John.
Thanks. I mean, we have spent a bit of time in schools already. I mean, maybe I could just start off with a kind of supplementary. I mean, I think I'm impressed, Ms Cullen, with the paper. I thought it was a very good analysis and quite frank. And I mean, is the message we're getting then from the legal profession that over time, you know, it will sort itself out, and we don't need to do an awful lot? And are you therefore optimistic that whereas at the moment still some of the best paid jobs are still in the hands of men, and in certain sectors, I think it was maybe commercial law and some of these things, that there was still a predominance of men, that is just a time factor and it's going to work its way through in due course?
I don't think we can be complacent. I think there is an element of change over time. I've certainly seen it in my career, and But I think there's still an explanation to be had as to why we have at the bottom of the profession people coming in, a very large number of women, but as we go through that and we move up the scale to senior solicitor, associate and to partner within private practice, the numbers go down. Now that's partly to do with demographics. Obviously there are more younger women and therefore they've not got to the stage of being promoted. But I don't think it's entirely accounted for that. There is certainly fewer women at the top of the profession than who've been promoted than you would expect from the numbers that are there. But I think it is changing, and I think even particularly within the range of careers, the paper that we produced obviously suggested that women tend to go into employment law, family law, litigation, which perhaps even in 2005 were regarded as lower status type of jobs. I think that's changing. I think because of the way that the profession's changed over the last few years, those types of jobs are now regarded as equally desirable to women and men coming in. And certainly in my own firm, I don't see any great preponderance of women going into particular areas of work. So I think it is changing. I'm very optimistic. I think if we look at the survey that's going to come out at the end of this year, we will see changes. It may not be, we're certainly not going to see 50% of women being partners, because that's simply not the case. I think in the best firms, there will be about 30% at the moment. But I would say in another 5 years that will change, partly because of the demographics.
I mean, the same question to the police. I don't detect quite the same optimism either from your paper or maybe from yourself, that although there's been progress, it's certainly not been quite as dramatic maybe as in the legal profession. And I mean, there's even some hint that by centralising things and a lot of relocation, that's going to make it more difficult in the future. So, I mean, is your feeling that, you know, we need to do a lot more rather than just wait for time?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you just wait for time to do it, and I work very closely with the British Association of Women in Policing, which covers the whole of the UK, and we say, well, if you wait, maybe in 15, 20, 25 years' time, there'll be a bit of a drift, and we'll start to see more women at the more senior levels and permeating throughout all the roles that we do in the police service. But when I look at all three of the papers that were submitted, well, all four of them, but three of them in particular, it just stands out to me that you have a great deal of women entering the profession at the lower levels, and that's to be seen as a success. But actually, there is far too big a difference between those entering the profession and those reaching the very top of the profession, because they're the role models of the future. And the bottom line is, it's about giving the best possible service to the public, whether it be through private sector, public sector, or whatever. If we're not able to choose the very best candidates because we've got a reduced pool, then clearly we can't give the best service. So there's a bigger picture here. The police service in particular, one of the things that we're very focused on is we have almost 30% of our police officers are women now, and the inevitability, the vast majority of those are at the lower levels, the lower amount of service. And a great number of those women will go on to have children, in society. And if we don't pay attention to flexible working in a much more creative way, in a much more demand-led type of way, then we're going to run into difficulties, because women will stagnate at a particular point in their career. They'll find it difficult to pick up that experience, to pick up the development to allow them to get promoted. They'll find it difficult to move into some of the specialisms that require particular hours to be worked. And a lot of them will just leave. They'll just leave the organisation and go off and do something else, so we won't retain them. But I'm positive in the sense that, I'm working very closely with the police service. We're pushing at an open door. They're very keen for us to come up with solutions, to suggest possible schemes that will assist us to do that. And one of the things that we're going to spend a bit of time doing over the next 12 months in particular is working on our middle managers, because you very often find those people the most senior in the organisation, they get it. They get the business case, as well as getting the compliance with the law. But where the blockage is around the middle manager level, who it wasn't done that way in their time. And all they can see is trying to work flexibly or creatively has been a bit of a problem and a bit of an issue. And we need to educate them that actually it can work in your favour. Policing, for instance, is not a 24/7 flat demand. There, as you're very much aware, peaks and troughs in when we have demand and when we have resource needs. And if you work cleverly with people who want to come back to work flexible working, be that part-time or compressed hours, you can actually cover that time of peak demand far more efficiently than we're currently doing. So to say that we're not optimistic, we are optimistic. We're optimistic because we're not pushing against a closed door. We're not fighting anybody. We have people who are willing to listen to us and willing to work with us. But if we don't do something, if we just wait for it to take care of itself, will still be waiting. And in fact, you know, the fear is that it'll atrophy because having got all of these women into the service, they'll be disillusioned. They will leave the service and actually they'll pass a negative message to people who've not yet joined the service. So we do have to keep on working and working with those that are currently in the service to retain them and to see these women get to the promoted posts and into the specialisms. And actually, I think some of the other services are the same, and I would actually challenge law that, yes, you do have a number of women in the more junior levels, but the number of partners has not hugely increased over the last 10 years. And so without the same sort of interventions, I don't think you will see huge change in the future.
Now, to switch maybe more to the schools, which was the kind of thing I was, and so it's not necessarily just Miss Matheson, but others as well. But I mean, that's two professions where I think we're seeing more women going in, but although there's issues still there. But there's other professions and careers where we're certainly not seeing more women going in. And I just wonder if the schools need to be taking a more proactive approach. And I'm actually not just thinking here of women, I'm thinking of all profession jobs, because I mean, I think engineering and the STEM subjects and so on, that seems to be a lack of knowledge in the schools. I mean, somebody told us at the last time, the schools have an influence, but they do not know too much about the world of work, and that needs to be tackled. And it's been suggested that some teachers, for example, spend their whole life either in school, university, or back in school again. So how can you expect them to know that there's actually lots of engineering jobs out there? I see youngsters coming through, you know, with politics degrees and all sorts of things, and they don't seem to realise that there's actually not any jobs there for them. Whereas, you know, nobody's told them that if they'd done an engineering degree, they would have got a job. Do you think the schools need to be more proactive?
I think it's not just down to schools. I certainly think there is a role for schools and for education. And we've ourselves done recent work with SQA looking at underrepresentation of women within the STEM subject areas who are delivering your physics, the chemistry. The balance is getting better. Physics is one that's outstanding, where there are more male teachers than female. So the role model, if you like, is not there. And we've also been looking at, with SQA, at the pupil choices, and they still are very traditional, of the girls opting majorly for the arts subjects, with the boys going down the technical and the career routes there, even interestingly into computing. It's sort of 50-50 till you get to what would be under the sort of National 4 qualification. When you get to National 5, it swings round and it's more for boys. And I think that's where things like the business partnership that I alluded to that we have in our school, that brings the outside world to the inside and into the school, is very, very useful.
How widespread would that be then?
I don't think it's as widespread as it should be. It was certainly an initiative that we had in Aberdeen quite a while ago, that every school should seek to have a business partner. But obviously businesses themselves require to commit to it. It requires time for that. Also, the Young Enterprise programme that we had involved people coming into schools and working with children. So you would perhaps have engineers coming in to do things, Connects Challenge within schools. But I certainly think there could be more done, because the business partnerships, businesses themselves are finding things tight at the moment. They don't have capacity necessarily within their companies to send people into schools. And when you're taking children out into businesses, there are health and safety issues, etc., that need to be addressed. But I certainly think that programmes like that are extremely useful, particularly when in some households, we've already referred earlier to children making decisions based on what their experiences are. They have very limited experiences in some families of job opportunities and, you know, oh, you could do this. Some parents, sadly to say, are not terribly ambitious for their children. They may not have had a positive school experience themselves and therefore may not value education as a way forward. And schools have a lot to do.
Interrupt you, but I mean, do you think a lot of teachers or some teachers see it as part of their role to challenge these assumptions?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would say that. A lot of the things, certainly speaking from a primary perspective, a lot of the planned play activities that go on and the outside experiences are encouraging children not to follow the norms. Like, it's not a case of we'll get the boys to move the desks and girls, could you put the pencils away? So we're trying in a little way, if you like, to change how children think, and through the work, as I say, that we've done with the sort of Glow TV and the stereotypical jobs. But I think there is a job to be done, but it can't just rest within schools. The implications for the choices that people make are far more complex than you go to school and your teacher says, oh, you'd be a good lawyer, or have you thought about doing this? Of course there's a role, and guidance staff in secondary schools are particularly skilled at working with young people and finding out what their interests are and trying to arrange work experience for them within that, so that the child can then, the young person can make up their mind, yes, this is for me, or maybe not. I think it needs to come down. It needs to start at an earlier age. Schools have a role to play. Businesses have a role to play, but we need to be doing a lot more to widen out into society and to make people aware of the opportunities that are there for everyone.
That very much. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has comments about whether schools should be doing more or whatever.
See, certainly from the legal profession's perspective, we're very keen to encourage people from all backgrounds to come into the legal profession. I say we've been quite successful, I think, at encouraging women, but we're very aware that there's a broad range of people, and that it's good for business to have a completely diverse workforce. And there's a project at the moment ongoing, which is, I think, run by mostly big firms in England and in Scotland, where we're going into schools who traditionally wouldn't have sent many of their pupils in to do law at university, to try to encourage them to think about doing law. And we find that many of the children there hasn't even occurred to them to think about studying law. So I think there is a role for professions and businesses to go into the schools and perhaps open eyes a bit.
Thanks so much.
We'll move on to John Finney. Siobhan McMahon, Marco Biaggi and Dennis Robertson have additional questions for the witnesses. Siobhan.
Thank you. It was back to the EIS, the submission, because you talked a lot about flexible working, but in the submission you talk about local authorities having to make savings with their budgets, and the cuts agenda, as was put in the submission, having a disproportionate impact on women. So how do you think that would impact on the flexible working programme as well?
Obviously, the cuts agenda means that there's less scope for contractual changes, so that when women come back into work, the contracts become permanent, and it's far more difficult to break out of that and to expand the time that they can have in schools. The cuts to the PSA agenda numbers as well have impacted greatly on schools. So it's very difficult for schools working within finite budgets to be flexible within themselves and to create opportunities. So it's very difficult to say. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd say to you, well, clearly the answer is that you don't cut education, because one of the things that we're talking about here in terms of gender stereotypes, you break that barrier by educating. Education is what does it. So you need to have the resources, you need to have the staff, we need to have more male role models within schools. We need to play clever. We need to bring in other people. We bring police into schools. We bring all sorts of people into schools. But in terms of the cuts, the hands of the schools are tied, and the hands of the education authorities in many ways are tied as to how we change things. So I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. I would like to think.
But is it impacting just now, do you think, or is this a longer term view that you have?
I do think it's impacting, because the majority of people who work in schools are women. So the cuts that have happened, where there's less flexible routes to working, where the contracts are cut, where there's more part-time and short-term part-time, the number of probationer figures, 63.3% has dropped to 35% of probationers who are finding permanent contracts, and not all of those contracts will be full-time. They might be for contracts for 2 or 3 days a week. So you're then thinking, well, where are the teachers from the future coming from? Because we are an ageing profession, and when the time comes, despite the fact that our pension age is going up and we have to leave, a lot of these young people who haven't been able to find jobs full-time within teaching and set up homes and live, will have moved on to something else. And then we'll be back into the cycle of having to promote teaching as a career and making it very, very attractive for people to come into. We're already seeing difficulties as well in our area of recruiting head teachers, despite the fact that the workforce is female dominated and the work demands of being a head teacher. We have schools sitting without head teachers because people don't want to take on the huge role. It's the work-life balance, the family balance, the caring balance. People are saying, I just can't do that. So all of these things impact on women and on the choices that they're making. So definitely, because it's a female-dominated environment, it's the women who are taking the cuts. We're also finding as well that the absence management policies that are there, the returning to work, which are designed to be supportive, are actually causing a lot of problems, because as women are taking time for caring issues, they're finding themselves hitting targets for absence management. They then get on to stage 1, and it's very, very difficult then to come back off of that stage. And obviously then at the end of a year, if it's necessary to transfer staff or if there is the potential for any redundancy situation, absence management policies are often part of the marking matrix for who will go, who will be at risk. So that's another way in which women are being hit. So
it's helpful. Just one final thing, which is slightly off to Miss Cullen. I was interested to know, not about the partner and, obviously females being lower at the moment, but obviously you think that will change in the future, about the statistics on the dependencies. So for males, 74% and much lower for the female partners. Has there been any other studies done into that to see why that's the case? Because to the untrained person, you'll look at it to say that they're still making the choice between family and work, but is there another study that suggests something different?
Well, we're hoping to have a bit more information. Law Society, as I said, is having more research done this year, and I think there will be information that will come out by the end of the year, which we'd be very happy to share with you. It's very difficult. It's a complex issue. Obviously, men and women make choices about their careers. There is no doubt that most women, or many women, take responsibility for their families, and they make decisions about how they're going to work. At the level of partner, there's certainly a perception that you have to work very long hours. That's not necessarily the case in many firms, and of course it will vary depending on where you're working, but in many firms it's possible to be very flexible about hours of work and to work reduced hours in return for reduced pay, for example. So there are many choices, but yeah, we're not there yet. There's still a long way to go until we can see that people who are in the most senior positions have the same sort of caring responsibilities as those at the lower levels, and men and women being equal.
On the issue of promotion, there was the sense from yourself, Ms. Cullen, about the influx of women causing it to then work its way through, and perhaps slightly more scepticism from yourself. But when we got to teaching, that wasn't really looked at in detail, because the statistics that were given in the written submission suggested that the workforce at the secondary teacher level is already 2-to-1 in favour of women, and I would assume that that's been the case for some time, whereas the head teacher positions at the secondary level are 2-to-1 the other way round. So if there is that critical mass almost of female secondary teachers, why has that not translated through into promoted posts, especially at head teacher level?
Well, I think some of the issues I've already referred to in terms of women taking career breaks and therefore not having the same opportunities. And I think there is no doubt about it that in many cases being a head teacher is not necessarily an attractive. It's a huge, huge workload. And for some people it will be a work-life balance, simply. And there may be other reasons simply that people are thinking, I'm quite happy to be a deputy. Quite often there's not a significant salary gap, if you like, between being a deputy head and being a head teacher. And since the buck stops with the head teacher, quite often people will say, well, this is as far as I want to go. I'm already working all of these hours and I can't give this anymore. I can't do this anymore and have my family and be the carer, if that's their designated role, and take that on. Beyond that, you can't appoint people, obviously, who don't apply for jobs. And as you're saying, that is what's behind it all, is probably the attractiveness of the post. And just very often, women quite often are not leated on to the post. You'll find that it might be an all-male lead that comes forward. It did increase over the years, and again, secondary education at one point was male-dominated, and I think there's a concern there that the drift is becoming that we have now a turnaround to more women teachers. But again, they tend, as you say, to be stuck at the principal faculty head role or into deputy heads. It's a personal decision for people as to why they do or do not apply for a post, and I don't have any idea as to why people would not. But I do know that the interviews are extremely, as you said, they're not allowed to say, oh, well, there's a man, that's a school that could do with a good male head teacher or a good female head teacher or whatever. There's clear criteria used to assess the performance, and that's how they judge who gets the post.
Intuition would be that it is a flaw of the position itself as it's conceived, as it is embodied, that is primarily putting off potential female applicants.
I think it could well be that. It's obviously different for primary, but I think it's certainly a huge workload attachment, a huge amount of responsibility, and I think that may well be a background factor to why people, particularly women, say not for me, thank you.
Robertson.
Thank you, Convenor. In another committee, we've been taking evidence on underemployment, and part of that evidence has been looking at the alignment between education and careers advice. I mean, we've touched on some of it here, but if we continue to give advice through school and further education and careers advice for more people, for instance, to go into law, are there the jobs there for them when they graduate? Or we do know there's a vacuum at the moment where underrepresentation for people going into engineering and construction, there is opportunities. Are we doing enough to align that?
Matheson.
I know that we ensure that our staff, our careers staff who work with individuals, whether they're in school, whether they're out of school, are armed with labour market information, as to what the jobs are, where the jobs are in terms of geography. And we also train them to challenge choices so that they're not just going in to fully accept choices that individuals have made. They will question, are you sure that's the right thing? You've done X, Y and Z at school. You could also consider X, Y and Z as a career. So we do ensure that our staff are as fully armed as possible when they are giving careers advice information to individuals, because at the end of the day, what we want to ensure is there's a good match of individuals going through education to the job opportunities that are available.
The case at the moment, we've got a lot of people who are leaving either college or university with skills and who are graduates, maybe going into or looking to go into a particular profession, and it's not happening. Whereas we have a huge area of underutilisation of maybe within the skills market, say in science and engineering, where there are vast opportunities, but yet we seem to continue to produce graduates maybe in the arts and sciences, and where the job market doesn't seem to be taking them up.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, quite often career choices are made prior to us having an engagement, but we will do all we can to challenge and to bring forward further suggestions and in areas of interest for them to consider. But at the end of the day, it's the individual that will make the choice, and choices are determined by very many more factors than just the information they get from their careers advisor at school.
Stereotype.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Convenor.
Ms Wilson, yes?
Just very quickly on that one, in my experience, it's also about educating the parents, because sometimes the young people will get that information, they'll start to think about a career in a different area, and then the parent, who has the very old stereotype, and I put myself in that category, you know, I was laughing earlier on saying I always thought, I was very good at physics at school, didn't even consider doing engineering because I thought that was a dirty, oily type subject and didn't really fancy that too much. You know, if one of my children came home, both of them are very good at science, and said to me, I'm thinking of doing engineering, Mum, somebody suggested I might do engineering, I might still have that old stereotype in my head, and I might say, oh no, you don't really want to do that, you want to do something else instead. So I think it's about not just educating the young people themselves, but educating the parents who reinforce that stereotype.
It's going to move now to John Finney.
Thank you, Convener. I think I should perhaps put on record a reference to Register of Interest, a former police officer and elected representative of the Scottish Police Federation. And I do so because I acknowledge my knowledge is therefore time limited. And I have some questions for Chief Superintendent Wilson, maybe we can broaden out. Thanks to all the witnesses for the evidence they submitted. I found it all very interesting. And not surprisingly, the statistics, I think, can be illuminating. I wonder, Chief Superintendent Wilson, is it still the case that to be eligible for promotion within the police service in Scotland, you need to pass an exam?
It's no longer an exam, it's a diploma now. Now, the difficulty, there's arguments for and against diplomas. The difficulty with a diploma is it's a long-term commitment. You know, at least with a, I guess, I suppose I'm showing my age and a bit old-fashioned, at least with an exam, you kind of could try and manage your life around the timing of that exam. You could cram for it if you needed to, if work and life commitments had got in the way. With a diploma, because it's over a period of time, we're finding now that people with caring responsibilities, and this is equally men and women, are struggling to do it because of the demands, the work-life balance demands. And if we're not careful, that will actually start to get in the way. When women do take the diploma, they're doing extremely well. When women apply for promotion, they do extremely well. The statistics show us that they do better than the men do. But the reason for that very often is they've got to be absolutely committed to it. You know, whereas many of their male colleagues will just give it a go. So no, it's not an exam anymore. It's a diploma, and that is starting to become to show some difficulties.
I wonder then, that is interesting, and I'll maybe follow that up, but are you able to say then, are there statistics prepared for those who are eligible for promotion by virtue of exams or passing the diploma who are in promoted posts? Because that would be an illuminating figure, I imagine.
Well, in my previous force, Tayside, we did that. Because it was something we were extremely interested in. We were able to show the lag between those that are eligible for promotion and those that are applying, and then we're able to go back to those individuals and ask them the reasons for not applying. So we had quite a rich subjective as well as objective understanding of that. That wasn't the case across the whole of Scotland, but we're now in a position where we will be able to do that over the next year or so. And what the information showed, that there are far more women qualified for promotion than apply for promotion. Now, there's a number of things holding them back. Some of it is around work-life balance. You know, they have caring responsibilities, or they're considering it. But some of it is around perception that you have to be 10 times as good as your male colleagues. And some of it is lack of role models. There was a whole load of things in the way. So what we've done over the last 10 years is we've tried to chip away each of those barriers, some of which are self-induced. So, for instance, we have a very well-developed personal development programme. Some of it's aimed at men and women, but some of it's very specifically aimed at women. And it's really aimed at, you know, if you take it down to its root levels, building their confidence and undoing the stereotypes of I have to be better than my male colleagues in order to be good enough. You know, we quote a figure which is well known that, you know, if there's a 10 essential criteria for a job, a woman will wait until she's got 11 and then apply for it and hope that she might be good enough. Whereas a man, and please, I'm not being male biased, but a man will have maybe 6 and I'll give it a go. And I know that's kind of anecdotal, but we've seen that type of thing happen over a number of years. And therefore what happens is the pool from which you can choose is reduced. And for me, as a senior manager, I want to choose from as big a pool of people as possible so I get the best person for that job at the time. And if people are, you're saying, if you can't make people apply for jobs, so you're not necessarily, you get the best of those that have applied, but it might not necessarily have been the best person that was qualified to do that job.
I think that throws up a number of other issues. Can I push you on the statistic of eligibility for promotion in relation to the gender?
I can't give you the figures today because I don't have those particular figures in front of me. I can provide you with them. I can provide you with them for Tayside Police as they were. And there may be a couple of other forces have prepared those figures as well, so I can forward them on to you.
Are you able to give us any indication of that at all?
I can't, and I'm not sure if Sarah, who's with me, if you know. I can't. I would be giving you figures off the top of my head, but there is quite a disparity between those qualified and those actually applying.
Ask about another factor, and it is in relation to the evidence of specialist posts, and in some respects relates to some of the other submissions that we've received there. And it is about, and again, my knowledge of it may have moved on, things may have moved on since my time, but are there any specialist posts for which time in service is a factor?
With each of the previous 8 forces were different, and I'm hoping one of the positives we'll see now is we'll see consistency across the whole of Scotland. But certainly it's my understanding with some of the posts there would be a barrier of 4 years. 4 years service before you could apply for roads policing, CID, etc. And that was based on the fact that you've got 2 years probation when you're really learning, and then 2 years consolidation. 4 years is perhaps arbitrary, but I don't think it's a huge barrier. If you look at the number of women that have been joining over the last 10 years, that shouldn't actually be a big factor now. And I was just looking, more closely at the figures that you will have been provided with. Even in the last 10 years, we're not seeing. If you take the lag of, it takes 10 years for people to get to the point where they're seen as being sufficiently qualified, we're still not seeing the figures catch up with each other. And when you go into the specialist areas, it's far more stark. So, for instance, we're not attracting women in large numbers to road policing. There's a lot of women now with over 4 years service, which might be seen as the initial qualifier. We're not seeing women in firearms positions. We're not seeing women do public order. Now, you may have said in the past those were the sort of parts of the police service that required you to be big and strong and have lots of... But no longer is that the case. With the equipment we have available to us, we're more a service now than a force. That shouldn't be a reason for women not applying. What we're finding when we ask them, the reason, is, again, it's about being a minority within a minority.
Arbitrary figure.
Well, people are just not applying. The women are just not applying to go into roads policing.
But that condition, is that not?
What, the 4 years?
Yes, because if you
I think you could challenge that, because it should be about it. But there is 4 years. Well, there can be exceptions, but somebody have to prove they're exceptional. Personally, I think it should just be: do you have the competencies to apply for the job? And the 4 years is arbitrary. And I think now we've moved into Police Scotland, that will go.
Do you envisage your organisation challenging that?
We would challenge it if somebody felt it had been a barrier for them. Absolutely, we're not afraid to do it. But we do it in a very gentle sort of way. What we'll do is we'll point out where we think there are difficulties.
Police, I was thinking.
Well, what we've done, we're very fortunate that when the Women's Development Forum, we've always worked in partnership with the service. We've not seen ourselves as being in an adversarial position. We've not, up until now, been a staff association. We were a working group of ACPO, or ACPOS as it was, and so it's much easier to do business with the service as against to coming up against them. So we'd point out a pitfall, and very often then policy or practice would be changed.
Can I say, to many extents, the issues compounded by issues like maternity leave as well.
Well, the service, we've pointed out to the service, is very obvious. If you have more women joining the service, and I said, very often our intakes now are close to 50-50, those women in the next 5 years, if you follow the natural progression of things in society, many of them will go on to have children, which means maternity leave, career breaks, etc. So we really have got to get really clever now about predicting the future and starting to find some very workable solutions, because otherwise we will just see it as a problem over the next 5 years, and it will become an issue as opposed to being something that's an opportunity.
Another example would be, and this may again apply to someone's ability to be, for instance, an expert witness, which presupposes a period in post. Is that something that you could look at as well?
Sorry, could you just repeat
an
that?
Expert witness. It certainly used to be that certain drugs officers could go on and speak to cash levels and the like.
Absolutely, and that's about the amount of time that somebody has done a particular job. Interestingly, in our drugs units or drugs branches, they all have various different names, we're actually seeing quite a number of women move into those units. The criminal investigation department, which very much, certainly in my early years, was very much a male bastion. I remember moving into CID and I was the only female among 60 officers. That we're seeing far more women move into criminal investigation now. However, when they have children, they're moving back out again, because you'll remember from your days that in criminal investigation, you don't know when you're next going to have to be asked to work overtime at very short notice because of the very nature of it responding to serious crime. And women are very often being made to feel as if they wouldn't quite be up to the mark because they say, I'm sorry, my childcare cuts off at 6 and I have to go home. So we just have to undo some of those stereotypes and encourage women to go into CID and remain there so that they can go on to become experts in various specialisms.
You're very frank in the submission about flexible working and the work that remains to be done by with middle managers. You know, I was party to the negotiations, the introduction of that, I think, in 1995. So it's disappointing that there hasn't been progress made, because you would have these middle managers have served throughout the period from which that legislation has been current. So how are you dealing with that challenge?
Well, what we're about to do is we're going back to the service to say here's what we think is the solution to the issue and the future issue over the next 5 years, and we're going to propose that we will do an input to middle managers, either by way of a section, an hour to 2 hours on one of their other courses, or preferably seminars where we can bring along middle managers and actually educate them as to the law, educate them as to case studies, showing where it's worked very successfully, and then get them to put some of the policy that I talked about, some of the legislation that's already in place, put that into practice, and then show them ways to which they can get around the problems. But actually, it's also about the people who want the flexible working with them to say it can't all be a one-way street. It's not all about, well, actually, I'd like to work Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday and I don't want to work after 4 o'clock. It's about working with the service to say this is the time of peak demand, and this is when I can assist the service. And actually, my experience as a manager for many, many years has been that most people who come back flexibly want to do that. They will actually offer to do bizarre things like work every Friday evening, which most of us actually wouldn't particularly fancy doing. Or we have some people come back and say, I'd really like to work almost permanent night shift. And for some reason, we go, shock horror, you can't do that. Well, actually, that would suit the service and it would suit the individual. So it's about getting those two to come together.
I'd give you that example because that was certainly my experience and completely compounded the stereotype. Yeah. I wonder if I can, in relation to that particular aspect, ask yourself, Ms Matheson, about the advice that you give to employers, because in your evidence you say we also assist employers in developing equal opportunities policies for their workforce, encouraging them to be flexible in relation to working patterns of women where the business can allow for it. What's the out there for an employer that doesn't want to be assisting?
We have recently expanded our activities in this area, so we've recently taken on new staff, recognising that a big part of our role is also working with employers. We're quite a new organisation, so we're still developing the appropriate staffing structures. So we now have a team who are working out there, working with employers, looking at employers' HR and workforce development needs and seeing how we can help address them, not just necessarily address them ourselves, but work with all our partner organisations, other public sector organisations who, and private sector organisations who can assist them. And one of the areas we will tackle with them, I mean, if they were getting any public sector support, they must, sign up to equalities legislation, so they must ensure, through recruitment practices that they're not discriminating, etc. But what we also want to try and do, and we're training our staff to enable them to do that, is to go in and show them the advantages of having diverse workplaces. That your workplace can benefit from having people from all parts of society working with them, because depending if it's a product or a service you're delivering, you're bringing in expertise from different parts of the organisation. So we're trying to get these messages over to employers. This is a fairly new area of our activity though, and we will be developing best practice and good practice to share with employers as we progress this area of activity.
Thank you. I wonder if I may, a final question to Chief Superintendent Wilson, and it's regarding the mentoring scheme. I wonder, is there any backlash from people who are not the subject of support from a mentoring scheme, and how that's addressed? Because again, that could be an issue in the workplace, and I'd be interested to hear of any other mentoring schemes from the other witnesses. Thank you.
Mentoring scheme, coaching mentoring scheme that was introduced started off, it was 4 of the previous forces that piloted it in a sense, and then it's rolled out across most of the country, and now it will be rolled out across the whole of Scotland. It's actually open to anybody, so it's not just for women, it's not just for men, it's just for people in promoted posts. Anybody is eligible to apply, and it's only restricted by those who will apply for it and finding sufficient mentors, which we haven't struggled to do so far. I think a lot more is going to be about communication and communicating that to people.
Is there any evidence on whether women are reluctant to seek mentoring?
No, women aren't reluctant to seek mentoring. In fact, they're more. My experience is that women are far more open to seeking those type of opportunities. Some men still think it's a sign of weakness to say that you need somebody, you need to have a shadow experience, or you need to ask somebody's advice. But what we were finding when we did a survey is a number of men were coming saying, that's not fair, I want to be mentored. And we had to write back to them and say, well, actually, it is open to you. So the only barrier we found is by being called the Scottish Women's Development Forum, having the word women's in there has been a barrier. Although we put in big, bold, red writing, this course is open to everybody, male, female, member support staff, police officer, regardless of your age, role, whatever. We get very, very few men that will apply. But those who have applied, whether to do mentoring, whether to do one of our courses, which is about professional development, I've always spoken very highly of it. They've gone out into the workplace, and the next time we get more men applying. So a lot of it for us, we have probably, if I say the one thing we've not been, and I take responsibility for this personally because I've been the head of the organisation for quite some time, we've perhaps not been quite good enough at marketing ourselves, at communicating. We wanted to start off gently without, so you didn't ruffle too many feathers. Now is the time to say, look, it's a proven product here, we're doing the right things, we're enhancing the development of the workplace, and actually we want to take that out into the workplace now. There's one final thing I wanted to add, because we want to get the opportunity to get it in, and actually it's going back on a point that maybe I was a bit slow on the uptake. The one thing I would like to see change, and it might be there needs to be a legislative change, is around selection processes. I still have a concern that they're very subjective. That although they're competency-based, because you have people, usually somebody very senior in the organisation, they tend to, and I only say tend to because it's difficult to evidence this, to select in their own likeness. And I don't necessarily mean physical likeness, but I did it that way, I came up through that route, that's what I had to do, and unless they can present the evidence to me in that particular way, I don't recognise it. So we're finding people who choose to do things that are not quite so operationally focused in the police service are struggling to be able to show that their evidence in another field is transferable across. So perhaps they've done a more specialist role, particularly, we used to talk about the sexual offences, for instance, being able to show that is transferable. I would really like to see us be much more transparent in our selection processes for promotion, our selection processes for specialisms, and have more independence around them, rather than just the person who wants more people like them. Because if you just keep having more people like you, you're not going to have the well-rounded team that we should have. So I'm sorry if I slipped that one in. It was kind of going back on something.
I wonder if any of the other panel members have comments on the mentoring schemes, the benefits or otherwise, please.
I think in the legal profession, we are very much encouraged to have mentoring schemes. The Law Society has recommended that we use them. And I think as a matter of good business, we all recognise in private practice, at least, that you get the best out of your people if you make sure that they are developing, they have the appropriate training, and that they're encouraged to put themselves forward for promotion or for specialist areas of training. And certainly in my own firm, we have mentoring schemes right from the very beginning, from trainees coming through. We're then encouraging them to get to the next stage of being taken on as qualified solicitors, then get to an associate, then get to be partner. But I think what we have found in the last 10 years at least, when we've had quite a well-developed appraisal system, that's the way to do it, is to ensure that in appraisal you're not just looking back at how you've done last year, but you're looking very much forward to what do you need to get to the next stage, what is it we're looking for you, so that people don't say, oh, if only I'd known, and that applies to men and women, that I needed to do this to get to the next stage. And I think particularly it perhaps applies to women, to give them the confidence that they can get on to the next stage by doing what's required. And it needn't necessarily mean that the perception that many people have of lawyers working very long hours and having to work every night to do business development activities, etc., that it needn't necessarily mean that. There are lots of other ways of making sure that you can progress. But it is very much a matter of mentoring and seeing how other people do it in the firm.
Obviously, you'll be aware that in schools, the probationer teachers receive mentoring, and it's a time allocated specifically for them when they are out of class. And the teacher who supports them is also out of class, so that they can discuss through any issues that they need to support them in making their way into their standard for full registration. Within my local authority, any new head teacher taking up post is allocated another head teacher as a mentor or supporter that they can contact specifically. But there's no time allocation for that. It's not face-to-face meetings necessarily. It's just a point of contact. We also have a head teachers network for new head teachers where they are given some time to meet together as a group with a more experienced head teacher, guiding them through some ideas of policy and protocol that they might need to use within their schools. The EIS itself has a head teachers network and invites head teacher representatives from throughout Scotland to come. It's obviously can't be every head teacher, but at least you can have people there to discuss issues. And for individual teachers, obviously we have annual professional review and development where we are meeting with our head teachers or our managers who discuss what we have undertaken in terms of professional development throughout the year, what we might need to see as a pathway for ourselves, either in terms of classroom development or indeed if anyone's seeking to go down the promotion route, what sort of skills they might need to acquire, what sort of professional development they might need to undertake in order to prepare them for that particular avenue should they decide to opt for it.
In the role that we expect our training providers to play in relation to developing and training modern apprenticeships, there is a support there. So, you know, apprentices are not just left to sink or swim within an organisation. They are employed by the employer. However, our training providers give them that support. In terms of young people, atypical, you know, either whether it be race or gender, moving into workplaces, we ask that the training providers give additional support so that they have that support there to support them in the workplace. Because if a young woman is moving into an engineering environment that's all male, you know, some additional support may be required. So we're asking our training provider network to ensure that that support is there. Quite often the young females, you know, quite able to cope with all of that. Quite often an intervention is required to ensure that the employer works, you know, its appropriate practices are, you know, other engineers that they're working alongside are displaying appropriate behaviours. But that additional support is asked for by our training provider network to support individuals going into these types of roles.
Thank you. Any further questions? Dennis, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Convenor. Really, it's on the question of, obviously, we're looking at underrepresentation of women and the gender aspect here, but women also, there are disabled women and women from ethnic and minority backgrounds as well. But what barriers are there in respect of women with disabilities and people from ethnic backgrounds in the workplace at the moment? Are there additional barriers? I mean, I think SDS, in terms of the apprenticeship programmes and that, I mean, I think there are barriers, and I'm just wondering how you actually overcome these.
We work with, you know, as well, we work with closing the gap for the gender issues, but we also work with organisations like BEMIS and SEMVO for race. You know, to work,
I'm specifically looking at women who have disabilities or come from an ethnic background anyway.
So we are working closely with organisations who support disabled young people as well, and I mean, yes, you're rightly so, they require additional support, but we try and partner the organisations that are working with disabled young people with mainstream training providers so that they can give them the additional support and try and access opportunities for them. Again,
do you believe the support is actually there?
We're doing as much as we can. You know, we're always open to listen to what else other people think we should be doing to help to young disabled women, for instance. But we are working with the representative organisations who deal with disabled young people and try and give them the widest range of support possible. I mean, if there is interpreter support or whether it be you know, IT support that's required, we will either help them access through other organisations the equipment that's required for the job to be done, and if we can't find that equipment or we can't find that support to purchase the equipment, we will purchase it ourselves on behalf of the individual. So we're trying to do as much as we possibly can. I think we always know we could learn more. We could, you know, there is more to be done. So I think if there was anything that we could learn from other organisations, we're more than happy to, you know, to speak and to take things on board and try and, you know, move forward and help us even more so.
Okay, does any of the witnesses have any further comments on that? Yes, Matheson.
Just to say in terms of legislation, I think the requirement for reasonable adjustment is often a barrier to having people with disabilities coming in, because the employer is only required to make, they can make a case for they cannot make this adjustment because they do not have the financial wherewithal, etc. And many of our old Victorian school buildings are not all disability compliant. We are actually passed a motion at our last AGM in terms of this, because we're finding that some people are hiding or attempting to hide their disabilities. They don't feel confident about sharing them with their employers. They don't feel that their employers are going to react positively or be able to give them support. Talking here particularly of people who may have, for example, dyslexia or whatever, and feel that that's not going to be helpful to them in securing employment. So I think there's a great deal to be done in ensuring that we are welcoming and that we are doing whatever we can in order to make every reasonable adjustment it is possible to make to support and get as many people who can be positive role models and as diverse a workforce as we can within our schools and in every experience of employment.
Yes, Miss Cullen and then Miss Wilson.
As far as the legal profession is concerned, the Law Society certainly has given advice to firms and to organisations employing lawyers about creating opportunities for disabled people. And of course the law protects disabled people just in terms of employment and in terms of clients who are coming into firms, for example, for accessibility. That said, looking at the survey which was done in 2005, there was less than 3% of responding solicitors who said they had a disability. So certainly it seems to be a very small percentage of those who are there. But whether there's actually a barrier to people coming in, I'm sorry, I don't have any statistics to cover that. But certainly it would be very much encouraged by the Law Society and by firms to comply with the law. And we would certainly hope and aspire to having no barriers to those who wanted to come into the profession.
From a police perspective, clearly, if you look at the numbers of staff from minority ethnic backgrounds, both as police officers and support staff, it is not representative. As the Women's Development Forum, we will try to work closely with SEMPER, who represent officers from a black background, and the Muslim Police Association, who clearly work with staff from a Muslim background, because of the issues around being female and being Muslim, being female and being black, etc. But there's clearly much more work to be done because of cultural issues that are many of which are accentuated being police officers. As far as disability is concerned, unfortunately, I don't have the figures, but there are certainly very few staff that have visible disabilities, and whether or not they just don't apply for the jobs in the first place, or I wouldn't think we'd make it difficult for them, because I think we would try to make reasonable adjustment. But you don't see very many with visible disabilities working in the police service, because bear in mind that almost a third of our employees are support staff. There'd be no reason why they shouldn't be. So I think my view is there's much more work to be done, and we can learn the lessons from each other. We're trying to work with other associations to say, here's what's worked for us from a female perspective. Can we work with you in other underrepresented groups and make the business case to take things forward.
Do you have any further questions, Dennis? Do any of the other committee members have any further questions for our witnesses this morning? Alex?
I just wanted to develop something slightly that, something I've raised before, but it's come from the panel. We've talked today about some professions that are traditionally male-dominated, some that are traditionally female-dominated. But I'm very interested in the legal profession, because the statistics appear to indicate that over a number of years it's almost switched, or is in the process of switching from being a male-dominated profession to a female-dominated one. And I accept the answers that were given earlier, that part of the reason for male dominance at the top end of the business is that change will take a while to work its way through the system. But I'm concerned to see some of the statistics that were presented that indicate the rate of attrition within women and the female in the legal profession is greater. And I'm concerned about the aspects of the glass ceiling here, because there are a lot of aspects of it that have been removed, have been dealt with, but there still appears to be a barrier there. Have you got concerns about the nature of the barrier that exists?
think as as a woman and as a member of a legal profession and representing Law Society, yes, of course, the statistics still show that the number of people at the top, and if you call the glass ceiling partnership, are certainly less represented. Women are less represented than men at the top, and as I say, in my own firm, it's about 30% women as partners, and that's not representative of the numbers of the women in the firm. So there's certainly a way to go. In terms of barriers to promotion, there's no doubt that there are barriers for everyone to get to promotion. It's very tough to get to partner in a law firm now, particularly when we're going through difficult periods. If clients don't have lots of business, then obviously we're very keen to get the very best people. And in order to get to promoted positions, we are very tough on men and women in terms of how they get through. So they have to be able to demonstrate that they're good lawyers, that they'll get on well with the people they're working with, they'll get on well with the clients, they'll be able to develop specialist areas of expertise, that they'll be able to encourage new clients to come in. All of that's very tough. They have to make a business case at every stage. So unlike the police, we don't have an exam system that we have to go through or a diploma. But there is no doubt that appraisal section, if you want to apply to become an associate, which is the next stage up, you have to make a business case for it, and it's tough. But I'm not sure it's tougher for women than men. I think my own perception and my own experience is that there are fewer women who are making applications for partnership or seeking to promotion, partly because of family choices that they make. And of course, they're absolutely entitled to make those choices. I've certainly had discussions with many colleagues who've said that they don't want to go to the next stage because at this stage in their career, they want to take a step back, work fewer hours and spend more time at home with children, for example. But I really am quite confident that certainly in modern businesses, those who are making the decisions about promotion are really not putting as a barrier the fact that an applicant is a woman, nor indeed that they have childcare responsibilities, because we see ways of getting round any issues that arise. So people do work very flexibly. As I've said earlier, because of technology, it's much easier to work at home. When I was a partner in the firm with young children at home, it was difficult. I had to get home for 6. I had to start work again. Very often came back to the office late in the evening to finish the work. Nobody has to do that now because we're able to take laptops home. You can be flexible in when you're going to finish things. So it is much easier, I'd say, for men and women with childcare responsibilities. But I'm not complacent. We definitely have a way to go. And I think to some extent it's a matter for the profession getting that through to the women or to the men who have childcare responsibilities, that it is actually possible to have a very satisfying, fulfilling career and have children, and you're not missing out on one or the other.
We heard when we were talking about the teaching profession and the police force earlier that part of the reason why men seem to be more successful as they move up through the ranks is that women are less keen to push themselves forward for these positions. Is that a problem in the legal profession as well?
It's not a problem I've encountered personally. I have to say, certainly in the last few years, I think women in the legal profession have become very confident that they can progress. I would say where people are not applying, my experience is it's not so much because they are female, it's perhaps more because of the work-life balance issue, that they've made a decision at a certain stage in their life they don't want to progress that. And perhaps very often colleagues will say to me that they will put that off for a number of years. Perhaps the children are through school or something like that, or at school even, and then they'll consider applying for promotion at a later stage. But it is very much a choice. I'm pretty confident that most businesses see it as a positive thing to have a proper balance of gender in their firm. It's good. Our clients are men and women. They want to see the same balance in the advisors that they're given. We try to fit the people who are giving advice, the people who are receiving it. And, if they're all male, middle-aged, then that wouldn't be representative of the clients.
I think it's a big challenge as time goes on. When you look at the intake of at the youngest end of the profession now, once that balance has moved 30 years into the profession, I think there's a danger that we might find that if we're only selecting the top from men, that we're going to end up with the wrong people at the top. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's, this is a question you don't need to answer unless you've got a genuine view on it. I see other professions as having to learn very quickly from from the experience of the legal profession. Medicine, for example, particularly general practice, I think is going through the same experience at the moment. And has a similar structure in terms of partnership. Do you have anything to teach other professions as they experience that?
Well, certainly, as I understand it, the Law Society is often looked to by other professions as a good example of how they've encouraged members of their own profession to allow and to assist women to progress. But I have to say, I don't really know much about the medical profession and how that works. But I think looking at policies, making sure that when you're considering recruitment, promotion and retention, that you have all the factors that we've talked about today in mind to encourage the best candidates, because that's really what we're looking for here. It's not really that we want more women or more men in particular positions. It's the best people to provide the service. And if you cut out half of the population from that, then obviously you're going to lose out. And I think that applies whether it's services to people wanting legal services or any other profession.
I think what I've learned from today is that I accept all that, but if the right people don't apply for the job, then we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? And can I thank the panel of witnesses for coming along this morning. This has been a very informative session, and it will be very useful to committee as we take forward our inquiry into women in work, so thank you. And that concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will take place on Thursday, the 25th of April, and will include further oral evidence on women in work. Thank you.